The universe, in all its vast and ancient wisdom, had a system. It was not a cruel system, nor a kind one. It simply was as immovable and certain as the pull of gravity between stars. Every species that had ever clawed its way out of its home world and into the shimmering dark of the cosmos carried with it a class, inscribed not in books or databases, but in the very architecture of their biology, in the firing of their neurons, in the marrow of their bones. The Valoran, those towering seven-limbed warriors from the Keth Nebula, were born paladins. Their skeletal structure alone could absorb enough kinetic force to level a building. Their pain receptors had evolved over millions of years to convert agony into power. They did not endure suffering. They consumed it. The Savari, the ancient serpentine scholars of the deep void, emerged as Archons. Minds so vast and intricate that a single Savari elder could hold the tactical map of an entire solar system in their working memory and calculate the outcomes of 10,000 battle scenarios before a lesser being had finished drawing breath. The Drenkai, small and fragile-looking, deceptively gentle, assassins. Every one of them. Their molecular biology produced a natural toxin so precise it could target a single species with surgical specificity. They had ended 3 wars before they even officially joined the Galactic Union, simply by removing the right people from the equation. Class was destiny. Class was identity. Class was the language the universe used to tell you exactly what you were worth. And then humanity arrived. They came in a single ship, not a fleet, not an armada, one vessel, broad and utilitarian, bearing the blue-green sigil of a world called Earth. They docked at Nexus Prime, the gleaming heart of the Galactic Union, with the quiet confidence of people who had simply decided it was time. The class registry scanners swept them at the gate. Standard procedure. Every species underwent it. The scanners would read their biology, cross-reference it against the Codex of Known Classes, a document so comprehensive it had taken 400 years and 37 species to compile, and assign humanity their designation. It took the scanners 11 seconds. For context, it had taken 3 seconds for the Valoran, 2 for the Savari. The Drenkai had practically lit the scanner up like a festival. 11 seconds of silence. Then the system returned a single word. Generalist. The registry officer, a Savari elder named Veth Kalos, stared at the result with all 4 of his silver eyes. He ran the scan again. And a 3rd time. The answer did not change. Generalist. He pulled up the codex entry for the classification and read it with the detached efficiency of someone who had processed 10,000 species in his career. The entry was thin, embarrassingly thin. 3 paragraphs, buried near the back of the codex in a section titled Theoretical and Unconfirmed Classifications. It had been written 400 years ago by a xenobiologist who had since been largely forgotten, a footnote in academic circles, dismissed as a theorist with more imagination than rigor. The Generalist classification, the entry read, represents a non-specialized biological profile. No dominant combatrat, no defined cognitive architecture, no singular evolutionary advantage. The Generalist is, in the simplest terms, a being without a ceiling, but also without a floor. Adaptable in theory, unproven in practice. Considered by most modern scholars to be a biological dead end. Veth Kalos processed this. Then he looked through the transparisteel viewport at the humans waiting patiently on the other side of the gate. They looked back at him. He stamped the paperwork. Generalist. Rank, unclassified. Threat assessment, negligible. The founding tournament was, in the words of the Union's founding charter, a celebration of the diversity and strength of all member species. In practice, it was a ranking exercise. Every new species that joined the Union participated in it, a gauntlet of stage challenges designed to assess combat capability, strategic thinking, and class potential. The results determined where species sat in the Union's hierarchy, their seat on the council, their military standing, their voice. It was, in every sense that mattered, the moment that defined a species' future in the galaxy. Humanity had been assigned a start date. The arena had been booked, and across Nexus Prime, in the viewing lounges and council chambers and military briefing rooms, the galaxy's great and powerful gathered to watch. Not because they expected anything remarkable, because it was tradition, because it was ceremony, because watching the newcomers fumble through the early rounds was, if one was being honest, mildly entertaining. The betting pools had humans eliminated in the first stage. The odds were not close. James Caleb Cole was 31 years old, 6 feet even, and had the kind of face that people consistently forgot within minutes of meeting him. Not because there was anything wrong with it. It was a perfectly adequate face, symmetrical and calm, but because it carried no performance. No invitation to look. He had brown eyes that absorbed everything around him with the quiet thoroughness of a deep water current, and he moved through spaces the way water moves through cracks, finding every angle, wasting nothing. He sat in the preparation chamber beneath the arena and listened to the noise of 60,000 aliens filling the seats above him. Across the chamber, his handler, a young Valoran named Dreth, assigned to him out of bureaucratic obligation rather than any genuine belief in the assignment's importance, was going over the stage briefing with the weary efficiency of someone fulfilling a formality. Stage 1 is a combat assessment, Dreth said, his 3-fingered hand swiping through the holographic display. You'll face a Keth warrior. Mid-tier Paladin classification. The round is scored on endurance and technique. He paused, set the display down, looked at James with something approaching pity. There is no shame in a first-round exit. Humanity is new. The Council understands this. A strong showing in the theoretical assessments afterward can still. What's his preferred striking pattern? James asked. Dreth blinked. All 4 of his secondary eyelids flickered. I am Sore, the Keth warrior. Does he lead with the right shoulder or the left? The Keth skeletal structure favors the dominant side. If I know which side, I can plan the entry point. A long silence settled over the preparation chamber. Dreth stared at him. You've studied Keth combat biology? I've studied everyone's combat biology, James said, without particular emphasis. The way someone might mention they'd eaten breakfast. I've had 18 months since the docking clearance came through. It seemed like a reasonable way to spend the time. Dreth opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his briefing notes with the expression of a being whose morning had just become significantly more complicated than anticipated. He leads with the right, Dreth said finally. James nodded, stood up, rolled his neck once, slowly left to right. Good, he said. Let's go. The arena of Nexus Prime was a masterwork of Union engineering. A vast circular stage suspended above a zero-gravity buffer field, capable of reconfiguring its terrain in real time. It could simulate 17 distinct planetary environments, generate atmospheric conditions from 100 worlds, and seat 80,000 spectators in tiered rings that rose toward a transparasteel dome through which the stars were always visible. It was, in every measurable sense, built to make moments feel eternal. When James Cole walked out onto the stage, the reaction from the crowd was not hostility. It was something more deflating than that. Indifference. A murmur moved through the stands, the human, and then the crowd settled back into its conversations, its refreshments, its quiet anticipation of the rounds that would actually matter. The betting screens updated. The odds on humanity's first-round exit lengthened slightly, as if even the algorithms found the outcome too certain to be interesting. The Keth warrior who emerged from the opposite tunnel was named Varashkin, and he was, by any objective measure, a magnificent specimen. Nearly 8 feet tall, his bioarmor plates, natural, grown from his own body, gleamed like hammered obsidian under the arena lights. He had fought in 47 sanctioned Union tournaments. He had never lost a first-round bout. He looked across the stage at James with a particular brand of focused disinterest that experienced fighters reserve for opponents they've already defeated in their minds. The scoring system activated. The crowd's ambient noise dropped by a fraction. The opening chime sounded. Archon moved. He was fast, terrifyingly fast for something his size, his right shoulder dropping and driving forward in the opening strike that had ended 30 of his 47 first-round bouts before the opponent even processed what was happening. James was not there. He had moved left, inside the arc of the strike, closer than any sane opponent should want to be against a Paladin of Varashkin's size. He moved with no wasted motion, no theatrical dodge, no dramatic flourish, just a clean, economical step that put him exactly where the geometry of the Keth's attack created a momentary void. His elbow found the junction between Varashkin's second and third armor plate, where the Keth's bioplating had a 17-degree gap that existed because their species had never needed to protect it. No opponent had ever been close enough to reach it. The strike was not powerful in the way that Paladin strikes are powerful. It carried no supernatural force, no class-enhanced energy. It simply knew exactly where to land. Varashkin's right side seized. A nerve cluster, compressed with precise efficiency, sent a cascade of involuntary signals down his dominant arm. He adjusted. A warrior of his caliber always adjusted, pivoting and bringing his left side into play. And James was already moving again, reading the adjustment before it fully formed, stepping into the new angle with the same unhurried exactness. The round lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When the scoring system displayed the result, a small, puzzled silence moved through the crowd. Varashkin had not been defeated. The round was scored on endurance and technique, not elimination, and the Keth warrior had indeed endured. But the technique scores were unusual. The system had flagged James's movement pattern for review. It had seen nothing in its database to categorize it against. In the commentary booth, a veteran Savari analyst named Coherus frowned at her display. "Interesting footwork," she said, more to herself than to her broadcast partner. "Almost as if she stopped. Recalculated. No, never mind. First round adrenaline. Let's move on." In the stands, the crowd moved on. James walked back to the preparation chamber, sat down, and drank water. Dreth watched him with new eyes. Said nothing. Stage 2 was the labyrinth. A sprawling, ever-shifting maze of corridors and chambers that reconfigured every 40 seconds, populated with increasingly difficult automated combat units. The challenge was not simply to survive, it was to navigate and neutralize, scoring points for efficiency and adaptation. Most species sent their tactical specialists through the labyrinth. It rewarded pattern recognition, spatial awareness, and the ability to build a mental map of a structure that refused to stay still. The Savari, predictably, held the all-time record. James entered the labyrinth, and the crowd, for the first time, paid mild attention. Not because they expected success, but because the labyrinth had a reputation for being unkind to first-timers, and there was a certain base entertainment value in watching the unprepared encounter it. What they watched instead was something that generated, over the course of the next 40 minutes, a growing and deeply uncomfortable silence in the stands. James did not fight the labyrinth's logic. He did not try to memorize it or overpower it. He read it, watched the reconfiguration cycles with those still brown eyes, and found the patterns that existed beneath the apparent chaos, the mechanical rhythms that no amount of randomization programming could entirely eliminate, and moved through the maze not as a combatant fighting the environment, but as a component that had simply decided to belong to it. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He neutralized each combat unit with a different approach, as if he was testing variables, learning in real time, each engagement informing the next with compounding efficiency. When he emerged from the far end, his score appeared on the boards. Second highest in the tournament's recorded history. The commentary booth went very quiet. "That," Coherus said slowly, staring at her display, "is not what generalists do." Her broadcast partner, a young Valoran named Threshville, leaned forward. "What do generalists do?" A long pause. "We don't actually know," Coherus admitted. "There's almost no data." She pulled up the codex entry on her secondary screen. "Read it again." Her 4 silver eyes moved through the thin paragraphs with increasing unease. "The classification hasn't appeared in a registered species in recorded history, so we have no idea what the ceiling is." Another pause. Longer this time. "No," she said. "We don't." Stage 3 was resonance, a test of class-specific abilities. Each species was evaluated on their innate power output. Paladins channeled their pain energy. Archons projected their cognitive fields. Assassins demonstrated their biological weaponry. James stepped into the resonance chamber, stood on the evaluation platform, and the sensors ran their sweep. The chamber was designed to read class signatures, to measure the specific frequency of a being's power output and assign it a quantified value. It had processed thousands of contestants across the tournament's history. Its readings were, by universal consensus, definitive. It read James for 6 seconds. Then it produced a result that caused the 3 senior technicians monitoring the system to call their supervisors. His resonance frequency did not match any known class signature in the database. It did not approximate one. It did not fall between 2 existing categories. It was, according to the system, reading as multiple simultaneous frequencies, overlapping and reinforcing each other in a pattern that the software had no framework to interpret. The score it finally assigned him, after running its analysis 4 times, was the highest the chamber had ever recorded for a Stage 3 competitor. Not in the tournament's current session. In its entire history. The crowd did not cheer. The crowd did not react with the roaring celebration that typically greeted a record score. The crowd sat in the particular silence of 60,000 beings who have just realized that the thing they dismissed is not what they thought it was, and are now quietly, urgently, reassessing everything. In a council observation box, 7 of the Union's most senior members had stopped their private conversations. They were looking at the stage, at the score, at each other. Run a background check. The council chair, a Savari elder so old her scales had turned to silver, said quietly to her aide. Everything. His training history, his genetic profile, his psychological evaluations. Everything we have. The aide moved immediately. The chair looked back at the stage, where James was stepping off the resonance platform with the same unhurried calm he had carried since the moment he walked through the gate at Nexus Prime. "What are you?" she murmured to the transparent steel. He did not hear her. But if he had, he would not have answered. Not yet. He moved through the remaining stages the way a tide moves. Not with the crashing drama of a wave, but with the deep, unstoppable certainty of something that has already decided where it's going. Stage 4. Stage 5. The combat gauntlet, where he faced 3 opponents simultaneously, and the scoring system had to be recalibrated mid-round because his technique was generating classifications it had no existing rubric for. The strategic command simulation, where he was given a broken fleet and a losing position and turned it into a theoretical victory in 11 moves, a solution so unorthodox that the simulation's AI flagged it as an anomaly and ran it backward 3 times to confirm it had actually worked. With each stage, the betting pools went quieter. The commentary became more careful. The conversations in the council chambers became more urgent. And James Cole moved forward. Steady. Sure. As if he had already seen all of this and found it, on the whole, about what he expected. By the time the final scores were tallied, when the great scoring board at the apex of the arena dome illuminated with the composite results and humanity's names sat at the absolute top of the rankings, above species that had been competing in these tournaments for centuries, the silence in the arena was the kind that has weight to it. The kind you can feel pressing against your chest. A single human. The lowest-ranked classification in the codex. At the top of the board. And then the next display activated. The one that appeared for the highest-scoring competitor in every founding tournament. The one that had appeared exactly 41 times in the tournament's history and had resulted in 41 consecutive instances in the same outcome. The final trial. The dragon. Its name, in the oldest language spoken by the Union's founding species, translated roughly as the Unbound. But no one used that name anymore. No one had used it in living memory, because to use a name implied a relationship, and no living being in the galaxy had a relationship with a creature that lived in the sealed chamber beneath the arena's foundation. It had been there before the arena was built, before Nexus Prime existed, before the Union had a name. The founders had discovered it when they broke ground. An ancient thing coiled in the deep rock, vast and terrible and patient, as if it had simply been waiting for someone to come along and build something worth watching. They had incorporated it into the tournament because no one knew what else to do with it. The final trial had become, over centuries of repetition, not a test, but a ritual execution. The highest scorer faced the dragon. The dragon demonstrated, in terms no scoring system needed to quantify, exactly why it was unkillable. The competitor received maximum honor points for participation and walked away, or was carried away, having learned humility. No one had ever done anything other than lose. This was not considered a flaw in the system. The dragon was not meant to be defeated. It was meant to remind the galaxy's finest that there were still things beyond the reach of class, beyond the reach of power, beyond the reach of everything the Union had built and measured and ranked. It was meant to be the ceiling. It had never failed to be exactly that. The chamber was vast and dark and old, older than the stone around it. The air carried the particular weight of deep time, the kind of atmosphere that forms in places where something ancient has breathed for long enough that the very oxygen has learned patience. James walked in alone. The doors sealed behind him with a sound like the closing of something final. For a long moment, there was only darkness. Then, slowly from somewhere in the vast black above him, two eyes opened. Not the eyes of an animal, not the eyes of a predator sizing up prey. Eyes that contained, in their amber depths, the accumulated experience of something that had watched civilizations rise and collapse and rise again like tides against an indifferent shore. The dragon descended. It was not the largest thing James had ever seen, but it was the most present. It occupied space the way very few things do, not by filling it, but by owning it. The air around it bent slightly, as if gravity itself was being polite. Its scales were the color of deep space between stars, and they moved with the slow, breathing iridescence of something alive at a frequency most beings couldn't perceive. It landed before him without sound, folded its wings, and looked at him, not his class, not at his score, not at the thing the tournament had spent the last several hours measuring. At him. The dragon had looked at 41 competitors in this chamber. It had seen paladins burning with pain energy, so intense the air around them ionized. Archons projecting cognitive fields that bent reality at the edges. Warriors of such raw, class-refined power that the stone floor cracked under the ambient pressure of their presence. It had seen all of it, measured all of it, found all of it, in the end, to be the same thing wearing different faces. Ceiling, it had always thought. They all have ceilings. They come here burning and certain, and they are magnificent, and they are finite. And I have been waiting for longer than their civilizations have had names for something that is not. It looked at James Cole. The Generalist stood still in the dark. He did not ignite with power. He did not project or radiate or burn. He simply stood and breathed and looked back at the dragon with those quiet brown eyes that absorbed everything without performance, without invitation, without end. And the dragon felt something it had not felt in 400 years of this ritual. Curiosity. It reached out, not physically, but in the way that very old things reach, through the deep frequency that underlies all class and all biology, the resonance layer that class is merely a shadow of, and it read James Cole the way it had read every competitor before him. What it found stopped it entirely. No ceiling, not a high ceiling, not an unusual ceiling, not a ceiling that hadn't been reached yet. No ceiling at all. The dragon had been created in the deep history before recorded time as a test, not a power, not of strength or strategy or the refined excellence of a single evolved ability. A test of potential, of the capacity to keep becoming. It had been placed here and charged with a purpose so old that the species who gave it that purpose no longer existed, to wait for the being that had no ceiling, and when that being arrived, to choose them. It had waited through civilizations, through the rise and fall of species that burned bright and classified themselves, and reached their pinnacles and stopped growing, through 41 tournaments and 41 magnificent, finite competitors. It had waited, and now James Cole stood before in the dark, and he had no ceiling, and the dragon made its decision with the absolute certainty of something that has been certain of very few things and knows the difference. It lowered its head, not in submission, in recognition. The amber eyes closed halfway, a gesture that meant, in the body language of something that predated language, I see you. I have been looking for you. You are the one. James looked at the dragon for a long moment. Then he did something that no competitor in the history of the final trial had ever done. He stepped forward, not to fight, not to flee. He walked toward the dragon the way you walk toward something you recognize, and he raised his hand, and he placed it against the scales just below the great jaw, where the resonance frequency was strongest. The connection formed, not with fire or light or any of the dramatic signatures that class-based bonds produced in the Union's documented history. It formed quietly, the way two frequencies find each other in the dark, a synchronization, a recognition, a completion of something that had been waiting in both of them to become whole. In the arena above, the monitoring feeds had been showing only darkness and waiting for 11 minutes. The crowd had moved from anticipation to the quiet, resigned respect traditionally offered while a competitor faced the dragon. The council members in the observation box were speaking in low voices, preparing the formal commendation they would offer humanity afterward. And then the chamber censors, for the first time in the final trial's history, registered not a combat event, but a bond event. The alert appeared on every screen simultaneously. Bond classification, Apex. Registered participants, Unbound designation, Dragon, and James Caleb Cole designation, Generalist. Status, complete. The arena went silent. Not the polite silence of a crowd watching a formality. Not the uncomfortable silence of a crowd reassessing its assumptions. This was the silence of 80,000 beings who had just had the ground pulled from beneath them. Every certainty they carried about the tournament, about the dragon, about humanity, about class itself, dissolving simultaneously. No one spoke. No one breathed. The great doors of the trial chamber opened, and James Cole walked out. Beside him, its wing partially extended in an easy, natural arc that sheltered him without confining him, walked the dragon. Its amber eyes were open and alert and interested in a way that none of the beings in the stands had ever seen in them. It moved with him the way a very old, very powerful thing moves when it has finally, after a long time, found a reason to move toward something rather than simply enduring everything. James looked up at the stands, at the 80,000 faces staring down at him, at the scoring board above, which was displaying a number that the system had automatically flagged as requiring manual verification because it had never generated it before. He did not smile. He did not raise his hands. He did not perform the moment for the crowd. He simply stood in it, quiet and sure, and let it be what it was. In a council chamber, 7 senior members were talking over each other for the first time in any of their careers. Documents were being pulled. The Codex entry on the Generalist classification was open on every screen, its thin 3 paragraphs suddenly taking on the weight of something catastrophically underwritten. The council chair, silver-scaled and ancient, sat at the center of it all and said nothing. She was thinking about the xenobiologist who had written those 3 paragraphs 400 years ago, about the words "no ceiling," about the way she had read them over a long career as a theoretical curiosity, an academic footnote. She was thinking about the being standing on the arena floor below, with the oldest creature in the known galaxy at his side, looking up at the stars through the transparisteel dome with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they always intended to go. She was thinking about humanity. 18 months in the Union. 1 ship, 1 competitor, and somehow, in the time between their docking clearance and this moment, they had studied everyone, learned everything, prepared in the quiet, thorough way of beings who do not need to announce their intentions because they're already certain of their outcomes. She thought about what it meant that humanity's class had no ceiling. She thought about what it meant that the dragon, the test that had been running for 400 years, waiting, had finally found what it was looking for, and what it was looking for had walked in wearing a perfectly ordinary face and answered to the name James. She leaned forward, folded her silver-scaled hands on the table in front of her. "Revise humanity's threat assessment," she said quietly. Her aide looked up. "To what level?" The chair looked down at the arena floor, at the man and the dragon standing in the light. "We don't have a level for it," she said. "Make one." Outside the transparent steel dome, the stars continued their ancient business, burning and collapsing and being born again in the dark, utterly indifferent to the small dramas of the species that had learned to travel between them. But if stars could pay attention, if they could look down at the bright ring of Nexus Prime and find one moment worth noting among the billions that pass beneath them every second, perhaps they would have found this one. A man, a dragon, a class with no ceiling, and a galaxy that was only just beginning to understand what it had let through the gate.